Hi everybody. So I'm going to try to recreate the speech I gave at my sister and now brother-in-law's wedding. I'm sure this won't be as good as the real thing, but I got a lot of good feedback on it, and I wanted to give it a shot. I had some people ask about getting a copy and stuff like that, and unfortunately we didn't film it, so I thought this might be the next best thing. So here we go. So Brooke and Michael are getting married. I've been friends with Michael actually longer than Brooke, my sister, has, and um, people always ask me like, "Is it weird?" Right? At first, yes, of course it was. It was super weird, but now at this point, it's actually really cool. Michael's one of my best friends, and my sister's marrying somebody that I really like a lot, and that you don't always get that, right? A lot of times your um, brother-in-law or sister-in-law you may not get along with, but mine happens to be one of my best friends, so that's really cool. So for this speech, what I did, I worked on it for uh, hours over the past 3 or 4 weeks, probably 5 or 10 hours, and it's not done. I didn't actually finish it, so I think I have some good stuff here. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So on this slide, I was actually going to do some trivia, but I decided not to. I couldn't come up with enough clever stuff. One trivia item I did come up with is I wanted to ask who between Brooke and Michael, I was going to ask who did this, who did that. But if anybody knows who played a college sport, and it was actually both of them. Brooke did play college tennis for 2 or 3 days and then quit her freshman year. But she was officially on the team, so she also played a college sport like Michael. I guess they both have that in common. They both quit a college sport as well, since Michael quit basketball. But that's all the trivia I have. I didn't have any. I tried to come up with some other stuff. It just wasn't that good, so we're going to skip this slide. Um, so next, I wanted to talk about 3 reasons that Brooke and Michael make sense for each other. There's a lot of differences between the two of them, and I wanted to talk about 3 reasons that they kind of make sense. And then after that, what I'll do is talk about this weird word we call love. We don't really ever define it or know what it means, and I'm going to give you my perspective on it based on a bunch of readings and things like that I've done. And then at the end, I've got kind of a challenge for Brooke and Michael. So the first reason that Brooke and Michael work together, the first reason that they make sense, is their flaws. So most people will say, with a relationship, how they're perfect for each other. So people inevitably with these speeches will stand up and say, oh, they're so perfect for each other, they're so perfect for each other. But ultimately, your flaws are going to be more important. So there's this British philosopher that I read. His name's Alain de Botton, and he says that on a first date, one of the best questions that we should be asking is how are you crazy? Because all of the ways that we're normal and that we're okay, people are going to be able to deal with, right? But ultimately, we're going to end up with somebody who we can deal with their type of crazy, right? And Brooke and Michael both have their own type of crazy. They have their own flaws, and they're able to deal with each other's flaws better than most people. So one of them is passive and very indecisive. Michael, he would accept a 2 times check bag fee just to avoid an argument. He would just put $50 down probably just to avoid the argument. The other one is quick to decide, argues really aggressively. They'll argue the airline about the check bag fee. So completely opposite. I know my mom and I both, ask ourselves on a weekly basis, how does Brooke deal with Michael? But ultimately, that's what matters, right? Like Michael deals with Brooke's flaws, Brooke deals with Michael's flaws, and that's one of the ways that they're ultimately good for each other. All right, so the second reason that Brooke and Michael work for each other, that they're a good fit for each other, is their interdependence. So there's this writer named Mark Manson that I read a lot. He's one of my favorite writers. And he surveyed 1,500 people who have been in marriages for over 10 years. And a lot of these people were on their second or third marriage. A lot of them were in gay marriages. A lot of them had been in high school sweethearts, all sorts of different stuff. And ultimately, what he did is he asked them, what lessons would you pass to others for marriage? What's worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? Things like that. And one of the elements to that was this idea of interdependence. So what is interdependence? So dependence itself is when you're relying on the other person to make you happy. So when you're relying on somebody else to make you happy all the time, that's ultimately something that's an unfair pressure on them, and they're going to fail at it, right? And when they fail at it, you're going to resent them. It's going to make for a very unhappy relationship in the end. So that's not going to work. Dependent relationships don't work. I think we can all agree on that. Independent relationships is when you're really not affected by the other person. So you might as well just be roommates, right? You're not. You each bring your own level of happiness independent of each other. And then interdependent relationships is when you bring your own happiness to the actual relationship. So let's say each person has like 10 units of happiness, because I'm weird and I think about math like this. So if each person brings 10 units of happiness to the relationship, then it's not 20 units of happiness, it's 30, 40, 50 units of happiness. So the two people bring their happiness to the relationship, and it multiplies rather than just sums up, if that makes sense. So Brooke and Michael are interdependent. They both are totally cool being apart for 3, 4, 5 days because Michael's traveling for work or whatever. But they also love to hang out with each other. So they're very interdependent. They both bring their own happiness to the relationship, and that's why their love works. So the third element is communication. So communication, you hear it all the time. It's key to a relationship. And actually, what Mark found in this survey of 1,500 people is this is a big misconception. Communication is not that important for a long-lasting marriage. It's actually respect. So inevitably, how communication works is it's going to break down. So all we have to communicate with each other is English, right? English is a really limited way to express like our emotions to each other. And when we're trying to talk to each other, we're ultimately going to be making assumptions and filling in gaps that the other person may not have meant, but they just can't find the right word to explain actually how they're feeling. And if we don't respect the other person, we're going to fill those gaps with negative things. But if we do respect the other person, even if communication breaks down, we still know that they have our best interest in mind. So English is limited. We can't communicate everything we're feeling perfectly through English to another person. But if they respect us, they're going to ultimately know that we have the best of intentions. So respect is really, really important among these 1,500 people that were surveyed, and that's one of the reasons that Brooke and Michael work really well together. So next, I wanted to talk about love itself. So it's a weird word that we throw around a lot. We always talk about, I'm so glad that you found love, or whatever it might be. And to really demonstrate this as best I can, to talk about this weird word, I wanted to bring up my cousin Preston. So Preston Albertine, these are a few pictures of him from a couple years back. You can see he looks a lot better now. But clearly, my love for Preston a few years ago wasn't as high as it is today. So I've got a graph here to display that. But what's happened over time is that my love for Preston in the early years, up to about 20, maybe 19, 20 years old, was continuing to go up and to the right. But then Preston changed for a few years, and it took me a while to adjust. And during the long hair era, you can see that my love for Preston really declined, and it took a hit. But now we're back, going up into the right again, and things are looking good for mine and Preston's relationship. So again, what is love? So there's a few things, a few kind of misconceptions I feel like about love. So it's on a spectrum. So as we learned with Preston, it's not either I'm in love with Preston, I don't have like a ton of love for Preston, or I don't. With anybody, with Brooke and Michael, it's not like they're in love with each other or they're not. It's a spectrum. So you can be more in love with something and less in love with something. And the goal is to continue to with marriage, to continue to get the love, increasing the love over time. The other thing is people talk about, I'm so glad you found this person, I'm so glad you found love. Love, at least to me, love isn't found. It's something, when we say we find love, what we really mean is, when we first meet somebody and we're very excited, it could be like a sexual thing, it could be like a romantic thing. But ultimately, love is really created and cultivated. It's something you have to work at. It's actually a skill. I've been dating somebody for almost a year now, which is the longest relationship I've been in, and I've learned this myself. It's something you have to really work on, and it's not always easy, but it's ultimately worth it in the end. And it's easy to start and hard to sustain. So like I talked about a second ago, early on it could just be like a romantic fling or sexual attraction or something like that. But to sustain it, it takes skill, it takes work. You really have to work on yourself. You have to work with the other person, and you have to have a lot of the qualities that we've talked about here. Like I said, it is a skill, and I can see that Brooke and Michael are working on that skill over time. So my challenge for Brooke and Michael is to make their love for each other go up and to the right over time. And that is all. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, let me know. Please reach out. The image of Preston, I'll include a newer image of Preston in the post, because it's not obvious here why I love him more than I did back then. But I'll include a newer image of him in the post. But I hope you enjoyed it. Please reach out if you have any comments or questions or anything like that.